There is a core faculty that all of us are giving up, and it might just become super detrimental as time progresses, and this affects all of humanity. That's you and I. What am I talking about? I'm talking about memory. Don't know if you've realized this, but I feel like we're beginning to de-evolve because we're taking a core faculty, that is human memory, the literal ability to make and form new memories, and we're giving it away. We're giving that skill to AI. Think about it. When you log into your AI, whatever it is, ChatGPT, I'm not going to judge, DeepSeek, go for it. Type it in, you've got your answer. It's like, okay, cool, now I know it. Do we know it? Do we even remember the stuff we read? Now, sure, some of it might get into long-term memory, irrespective, but I'm going to argue that there's this real danger present where we think we gain the information, but the reality is we don't remember any of it because we're offloading what we used to do to enhance our memory and actually get things into long-term memory. So how do we solve this problem? Well, you're in luck. That's exactly what I'm going to cover in this video. I'll first take you back in time so you at least see who I am and why I'm experienced and why you should consider listening to what I have to say on the topic. Then I'll give you the solution, which I call a learning framework. And it's kind of curious because if you ask ChatGPT for this information, it won't be able to produce it. And it might even start talking about its own neural network that it uses to do its own memory. But that's a whole different side video. Remind me to do that in the future. But for now, really, really simple. I'm going to empower you to boost your memory, and right at the end of the video, I'll even give you some extra advice for the most effective way for you to boost your memory in the modern age. If that sounds interesting, stay tuned. Let's get started. Do we still need to try and memorize a phenomenal volume of information, or can we now just rely on AI agents like ChatGPT to augment our memory? Now, I'm going to argue that there's a fundamental flaw with relying on technology to replace human memory for quite a number of reasons. And in order to uncover all of this and to help you actually do better with your learning, we need to do some time travel so I can first demonstrate how I gained expertise on the topic. It's really straightforward. Now, perfectly preserved, arguably, is my notes from when I was a university student. Now, for whatever reason, I've been really methodical at actually keeping every piece of notes that I've ever produced out of every university study and even high school, which is kind of curious. Why would I do that? And now it's coming in really handy because, I have a complete collection of everything I've ever studied. And I can also track how my study progressed and how my techniques progressed to enhance my memory. Now, this one is just a random one that I picked out. It's actually a second-year med school textbook, or MedSci 205 to be specific. And this particular textbook has a very wide array of human physiology. Now, what I do find interesting is my organizational system. You can see I had these little papers embedded within the course book. It gets kind of messy, and I guess I'll pick one out because I'm sure you're curious to see what it looked like. Look at that. You can actually see it as well. So that is what my notes would have looked like when I was a second-year university student. Underlining a very simple structure, and yeah, that looks fairly basic and nothing too exciting. But that's not the lesson that we're here to learn. There's something else, something a bit more important. Check this out. Now, around the same time, this would have been a rather infamous textbook for a lot of students. So pharmacology, I'm sure the edition will tell you just how ancient I really am. But by example, there's a very large volume. Students during the semester, and that's usually one semester, not even a full year, will have to go through and, by some weird miracle, memorize and learn this entire volume. And keep in mind, you're being assessed according to your ability to retrieve information. As an example, if I were to randomly open up on this textbook, pretend this is your test paper, and it says drugs used to treat asthma, you're going to have to start talking about bronchodilators and how they're able to enlarge the passageways feeding air into the lungs themselves, just so that we can counter that asthma effect. Or maybe we go to another page and it says, maybe not that page, it's not PG, maybe this one, synthesis of GABA. What is GABA? Well, it's actually a neurotransmitter in the brain. It's a primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it probably is the most dominant neurotransmitter in the brain. So really, really dependent on it to maintain normal function of our brain. And just one more page for good luck. Okay, another page related to neurotransmitters is going a complete different direction. Ah, yes, cell proliferation. Now, you probably remember all the stages of this particular cycle. How we have that very handy acronym, its power makes all the cells energy. Did you hear about that? Interphase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis. But how are we meant to remember all of this? Now, the famous psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus, way back in the early 1900s, actually gave us some really cool science relating to memory. He called it the forgetting curve, with the idea being that out of a given resource, maybe this textbook, after studying it, let's say flat out for one full night, should we go like something crazy? Let's go 6 hours. How much do you do? How much of it would we remember 7 days later? Now, according to his amazing graph, that number is actually unbelievable 20%. But I'm going to argue that for most of us, it's probably less, because somehow we can increase the amount that we remember, giving us, I guess, ChatGPT-like memory, if we follow a few tips or tricks. Now, you yourself would be a veteran on this. I'm sure you're following several YouTubers on the productivity field. You probably regularly watch podcasts that teach us on how to boost our memory. You probably read a little bit of journal articles, stay up to date on the latest methodologies on how our memory works. You probably test out a whole bunch of study strategies. You're probably actively trying to enhance your ability to encode information into storage, but surely there's something missing. Now, it took me a while. Now, during my undergraduate studies, I was refining the concept. I had already come to understand what was missing from my learning to enhance my memory. It's only really when I started my PhD that I began to fully understand how we actually enhance our memory. And it's not through watching YouTube videos. Unless you watch my YouTube videos, of course, they're amazing. You can't blame me for that one. And it's definitely not through all the random things we read, because the reality is your grade is derived by your memory when you walk into your test or exam, you sit down, and then everything that you've read, and in this case, just a few 100 pages worth of pharmacology, you have to actively recall anything. Now, I'll give you an example. If they pull out one keyword, hopefully you can keep up with this word. Let's randomly open up somewhere, and here it is, apoptosis. Let's say your exam question is on apoptosis. I'm not making this up, by the way. It's literally right there. What would you be able to tell me about apoptosis? Now, in the modern age, you're going to load up ChatGPT and you can write me a thesis about it, but in reality, you're still going to have to actively recall the information that was on this page, in this location, for your exam. Now, if you fail to do this, naturally, your exam grades are going to be terrible. And if your grades are terrible, you're not going to be so happy with your future prospects, shall we say. So what's the secret? How do we boost our memory? Well, I've managed to take everything that I've learned over my entire studies and condense it down into what I call a learning framework. Now, to put it really simply, I can break memory formation down to about 5 steps. First one is senses. Think about it. The very first thing you do when you receive your material is to employ one or another sense to extract the information out of the resource. So maybe you use a textbook, maybe you listen to your lecture recordings, maybe you use AI-generated answers, or maybe you do some hunting on websites, or maybe you take out a library book. Whatever the resource might be, you're going to have to pull key information from that resource. And again, for your exam, you're actually going to have to remember that information. So still, memory is the fundamental problem. No matter what you do, everything begins with that input. Now, you might be familiar with the concept of learning styles. Now, learning styles got heavily debunked by some research articles that claimed if you take a group of students and provide them with 2 different mediums, let's say for the one group, we provide them textbooks, so paper materials, the other group, auditory materials, we give them a test, then halfway through the semester, we switch the groups, then we give the group that had auditory visual material and vice versa, then we should be able to test and figure out to what degree these inputs, the sensory inputs, actually change our grades. Now, the studies found no difference, and therefore the claim was that the input of information doesn't actually affect your memory. But I'm going to say those studies are wrong fundamentally because they didn't control the variable that actually creates memory. More on that in a second. Stay tuned. The second step in this process, after we've detected that input, is focus. Now, if we don't direct our focus onto the material, we're not going to have any memory. That's a very easy thing to perceive. If I were to open a page in our guide textbook here and give you a minute to study the page, if you're busy on your phone and maybe you're watching another TikTok video on a different device and you're just not focused on the material, your attention will be 0. That doesn't surprise you or me, which tells us that focus is actually really important on this. But this is where other factors actually actually intervene. So as an example, when your focus is broken, there is always a reason. And that reason I'm going to call the relevance barrier. There are factors that can actually prohibit your ability to focus. And if you don't address those factors, if you're not aware of those factors, that's actually going to negatively impact your ability to form memories. So that's critical. Now, aside from focus, once we've actually given our focus to a subject material, whatever the input might be, the next step's really important. That information enters short-term memory. Short-term memory has many names, like working memory, but I still prefer to call it short-term memory because in reality, this is information that our brain has recognized as important. It is put into storage, but much like a computer where we have memory, short-term memory as well, in the form of RAM, random access memory, that information is only held for a short period of time. And this is where a decision needs to be made. You, as the driver of your brain or your mind, have to give the brain signals that this information is important. Now, there's a few ways that these signals can be derived, but for the most part, when we're studying textbooks for exams, we're going to have to do it through a strenuous activity. We're going to have to sit in the library and actively force the information into our brain. Now, as we're busy doing that process, some of the information will inevitably reach long-term memory. And that's more or less the current model of memory. But this is where we run into a problem. There is a huge divide between short-term memory and long-term memory. Information doesn't just magically go into long-term memory. It requires very strategic processes in order to get the information into your long-term memory. I'll give you an example, and let's use one of the earlier ones that popped up out of the textbook, the cell cycle, right? That's a very easy example. If I asked you that question in an exam and you've never learnt it, zero sensory perception of the information, zero focus, therefore your memory is zero. There is nothing on it unless you have some recollection of it in a previous study or by some random reading. That means you had to have gotten that information from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. So how do we do that? Well, how did I do it? Well, I devised an acronym. It's power makes all the cells energy. Interphase, it's power, prophase, makes metaphase, all anaphase, the telophase, cells, cytokinesis, all the cell's power. That's literally the cell's powerhouse in terms of how it is able to sustain and survive. Cell division. But the reason why I remember it is not because I remember the phases. In fact, I would most likely always forget the phases. But because I remember the acronym, as soon as I hear that trigger, cell cycle or mitosis, then that acronym pops into my mind. Its power makes all the cell's energy. From that acronym, I can retrieve the correct words. But if I had not had the acronym, I would not be able to retrieve any information. Now, that doesn't mean it's not stored in long-term memory, but it does mean the next step after short-term memory is actually really important. Now, I'm going to call it sorting. That is your ability to take this sum of information loaded into your memory, short-term memory, and sorting that information is really critical. In fact, that's what a lot of these memory techniques do when we employ them. That's exactly what acronyms do. They take the information, create order. The order is locked away into long-term memory, and we can recall the order even if we can't recall the information. But that's only one technique. There are many others. Another example, mind map. Now, unfortunately, during my second year of university, I don't think I hadn't fully refined my mind map technique. I kind of knew what was important, but I hadn't quite got there. So as an example, some of my handwritten notes. Now, going off the headings here, I'll try and read it for you. So this is the mechanics of breathing. I had respiratory system, primary heading, another primary heading, diffusion rates, another primary heading, ventilation, then a subheading under ventilation. I had diaphragm contracts. Then we jump down, a new main heading, the pleural space, new main heading, relaxation pressure. Now, the reason why this information's not very memorable, even though I had studied it for an exam, is because the sorting of the information is relatively poor and really not that memorable. Now, had I back then used an acronym for it, I may still be able to fully recall all the notes that I had produced if I had put the time in to produce an acronym. Okay, so this is getting kind of interesting. I think you're beginning to see the picture. So we perceive the information through our senses. We then have to place our focus on the information, and there is this relevance barrier. If we don't deem it to be relevant because we're not interested, then we don't focus and thus we don't remember. If we manage to get it into our short-term memory, we need to do something with it. Now, if we don't communicate to the brain that, well, this is kind of important, it will inevitably decay. If we do manage to convey that this is important, we need to find a way to sort the information in order to get it into long-term memory. Now, I'm going to argue if we fail to do effective sorting, we might get it into long-term memory, but it's going to be a very weak memory. If you want to get it into long-term memory for an extended period of time, you need to boost the signal strength. That is, the strength of encoding of the memory has to be boosted. The only way to do that is through sorting the information and then employing very specific study strategies in order to enhance your memory. So going back to those initial studies that actually did tests on the VARC learning modalities, the idea of a visual learner or an auditory learner, they didn't control the techniques that were being used to sort the information, and thus their entire experiment is fundamentally flawed. If we don't control those variables, the test result will be completely meaningless because we're not actually controlling the process that allows memories to be encoded into long-term storage. So how does all this help you? How does this actually help us to get better memory? Well, inspired by this concept that the core faculties that we need to enhance our memory are just not covered in the resources we find online. Doesn't matter where you go, whether it's lecturers, teachers, tutors, ChatGPTs, doesn't matter where you go, no one seems to provide the information in a way that actually enhances our memory because I don't think anyone truly understands what's required. Now, I've managed to derive this formula and I'm actively trying to package the formula in a simple package that you can use to enhance your memory storage. I call it STM for short. See what I did there, short-term memory, because it enhances your short-term memory, but it's not short-term memory. It actually stands for study method, study technique, and memory technique. Those are three separate categories for all of the study strategies in existence that actually enhance different aspects of the learning framework. So by example, study methods are study strategies that would enhance your focus. So example, there would be Pomodoro technique. What is the purpose of Pomodoro? You set the timer, it enhances your focus, which enhances your memory indirectly. It doesn't boost your memory, it enhances your focus. So that's a really important detail. So a study method example. Now, study techniques are a bit different because they act more on the short-term memory process. That is, they enhance your ability to get information into short-term memory. An example here would be something like the Feynman technique. The concept being, if you can take a complicated concept and break it down really simply and explain it to someone completely inexperienced, that is when you truly understand the concept. And I'll give you an example. Take any video game you've ever played. Assuming you've done, I don't know, maybe 100 hours, could you explain to a newbie to the game exactly how the game works? And you may not know everything with that limited experience, but you would definitely give them a good breakdown of how the game works. In that process, when we're actually retrieving that information and putting it into practice, that is a great way to prove our understanding of the information. And the last one on the list is the memory technique. Now, the method that I used all the way through my studies was a modified version of the mind map. I've even modified the mind map further to what I believe is the first of its kind, a memory archive system. It has a fixed structure because I've derived structure as being critical for the sorting process. The structure superimposes on itself to allow for a memory hierarchy, which more or less means the information is delicately sorted and then processed into long-term memory in a very effective way. That is, you can take everything that you've ever tried to learn, add it into a memory device that gives you memory of that information for life, as in you should theoretically never be able to forget it. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? I don't think we're ready to talk about memtholos. It's top secret for now, but I will eventually unleash this into the wild. Stay tuned for that. So where can we find this? Well, you're in luck. I've released the information on what I believe is the first of its kind. I'm going to call it MemVault. The sense that it's all of the study strategies vaulted up in one location. By my count, once I'm finished with this vault, there's going to be over 150 study strategies organized according to function, whether they enhance your focus, enhance your short-term memory, or enhance your ability to store information. And I give full descriptions of how they work, and I'd hope eventually to also do video tutorials on each study strategy in terms of how to implement them and how they actually work. There is one snag. It is pay to win. There is a small fee that I charge for access to the information, but more details on that on my website. Why don't I just give the information for free? I'm a big believer of early philosophy that education should be free. If you go back to the early Greeks, who were really the pioneers of the education system that we share today, whether it's the academic system or even just normal schools, by my own definition, Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, was the first person to actually start a school. And that school has indirectly impacted all of the educational systems present today. So going back to the original source material, education was deemed to be free, and those who were interested and had the ability to focus would actually gain from the information. So why do I put a price on it? Well, in the modern age, information has changed. By example, you could load up any given topic from an AI and get any bit of information immediately. And that's where being able to put a price on something that is information but is actually really, really valuable almost becomes invaluable. There is no price that you could put on information like this. So check it out. I've made it a monthly subscription. You can use it while you need it. When you don't need it, you cancel the subscription. It's very straightforward. So when you're studying, use it. If you find no need for it, you cancel your subscription. Very, very easy, as are most subscription models. But the benefit here is you're going to gain the information in a very concrete package that you will not get from any AI or any expert in the field, because as far as I'm aware, I'm the first person to attempt to do this, which means you gain the collective sum of all my expertise in a very condensed package that I wish I myself had when I was busy doing my university studies. So definitely check that out if you are interested. By all means, links in the description. I believe it's going to absolutely change the future of your education, and as I empower your education, you're going to reach whatever goals you set. And that's my mission, to make sure everyone can achieve any goal they set, and that their memory will not be the stumbling block to that future career path. So well done there. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. Good luck on that learning framework. Check out the related material on my website by all means. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'm sure someone's going to benefit from your questions. Test it out. If you find the learning framework works, or maybe if you join MemVault, if it works, share your experiences. If it doesn't work, share your experiences. Only through the troubleshooting process can we actually refine memory to find a model that works for everyone. Well done. Stay tuned. I'll see you on the next video.